Amen. We're going to go into our message this evening, and the message is going to be taken from Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. Amen. And the title of the message is Signs of the Last Days, and we're just going to pick this up. Hey, how you doing? Long time no see. It's good to see you. All right. Amen. So good to see each and every one of you guys. Signs of the Last Days. You know, I was just thinking yesterday, I was teaching an apocalyptic literature class, and you know, as we're going through it, you see how the Lord has told us so much and how so many people ignore it. In fact, the ones that are going to be caught in the tribulation are going to be caught basically because they've ignored what God has written for centuries. And yet, God has made so many things clear to us as to how things are going to wrap up to the end of time. So I'm going to try to put some type of chronological framework on it so you can see what the scripture says, because things kind of happen in a certain fashion where certain things happen before this, before that, before that. And sometimes people are confused as to why and where we get that from. And so we kind of put things together. Now, one of the reasons, or a major reason why Daniel is studied with Revelation is based upon this prophecy here of Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. It's an incredible prophecy where God, for the first time, or the only time in the Bible, actually gives a prophet a mathematical framework for the timing of things up until the end. And so Daniel was given this. It's a mathematical schemata to figure Christ. Now, where many people have tried to predict the end of time and they've tried to predict other things, years ago the Seventh-day Adventists used to do it. They don't do it anymore. Certainly the Jehovah's Witnesses have done it for years. They've been predicting when the coming of the Lord is going to come. And obviously there are other people out there trying to do it as well. And let me say this. The Lord has already said no man knows the day or the hour. So it's very clear nobody knows because it's not given to man. So people come up, what about the Mayan calendar? It doesn't matter whether it's the Mayans, it doesn't matter whether it's the Incas, it doesn't matter whether it's the academics, it doesn't matter whether it's the scientists, it doesn't matter whether it's Nostradamus, it doesn't matter whether it's Gene Dixon, it doesn't matter. Let me make it perfectly clear. It has not been given to any human to know. Very clear. Matthew 24:36, and of course in Mark 13 he tells us that as well. He says, no man knows. In fact, in his human state, it was not given for Christ. It was given into the hands of the Father. Not even the angels know. So you don't know. So the very fact that you're trying to figure it out is already in rebellion to God. So you can't be of God trying to figure it out because God has said no one can figure it out. So you're already in rebellion in that way. However, you can know the signs of the times. Those things that God has revealed that he has made us know so that we do know what escalates towards the end. And certainly here in Daniel 9, 24 through 27, he's given us in verse 24, 70 weeks are determined upon your people. This is very interesting, 77s, and that literally means 70 times 7, which is 490. And in the language, the original language is 77s. We know those weeks stand for weeks of years. 70 times 7, which is 490, because of how the schemata works. And certainly we know that what was given. So 70 weeks are given in verse 24 to make an end of sins, to make an end of, or make reconciliation for iniquity, to finish the transgression, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. In other words, 6 of the major things that consummate time as we know it. So everything, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to anoint the most holy. Certainly that's dealing with Christ. Some people say it's the temple, but it's Christ who is the real temple. And certainly to make an end of sins would be the consummation of things. So he's actually given him, he says, you got 70 weeks to in it to finish everything. And then in verse 25 and 26, he deals with the first 69 weeks. And he says, know ye therefore that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So 62 is 62, 62 plus 7 is 69. 69 times 7 is 483 years. So he's predicting that from the time that a commandment is given to go and restore Jerusalem until Messiah shall be this 483 years. And of course, we know under the Persian Empire that commandment was given, and it comes out to AD 29 or 30 when Christ marches into Jerusalem, proclaiming himself to be Messiah before his crucifixion and passion. And then also in verse 26 it says, and after 62 weeks, because it's including the other 7 from the previous verse, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. Now this is interesting. The Messiah will die in that same week, which is exactly true. A week of years is 7 years. Christ's public ministry lasted 3.5 years. It was right in the middle of that week that he was cut off. But he says, but not for himself, because Christ died for the sins of the world. He died for our sake. So all of this is being given Daniel 600 years prior to it actually transpiring, that this is actually here. And so certainly we have the perspective of Daniel, but we have the perspective of looking back to know that's exactly what occurred. So he's going to be cut off, but not for himself. And then it says in verse 26, the people of the prince shall come. The people of the prince shall come against the sanctuary. And they're going to actually destroy the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. Now what that means, the people of the prince, that's the Romans. In AD 70 is when Titus came in. We know the history. Vespasian was the general, but he wanted to run for office to be the next emperor. So he gave it to his son Titus. Titus was the Roman general that actually led the expedition to go in to the Jerusalem temple. And he literally was looking for something, and in the process, he took the temple apart brick by brick, fulfilling what Jesus said. If you read Matthew 24, when they said to Jesus, what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? He said, you see all of these buildings, not one stone shall remain upon another that shall not be thrown down. That was literally fulfilled in AD 70 when the last temple that we know of was taken apart. And in AD 70, when the temple in Jerusalem was taken apart, there has not been a temple to this day. It remains no temple in Jerusalem. On the Temple Mount area has been constructed an Islamic mosque. Now this is very interesting. And also on a certain side, the east side, which is the entry of Christ when he shall return, the Muslims have put a burial site because they feel as though a priest can't touch a dead body, and that's their way of keeping the Christian Christ from coming in that way and to try to promote Islamic eschatology. And so you see this is happening. So the first 69 weeks have been accounted for, but it's that verse 27 where we get the 7-year tribulation. And I want you to mark it down right here and now. The 7-year tribulation that is spoken of is identical to the 70th week of Daniel. The first 69 have been accounted for. But this last one is in verse 27 of Daniel chapter 9. It says, he is tied into the people of the prince in the prior verse, which is why there's a belief in a revived Roman Empire. Now, this is not only from Daniel and Daniel's earlier visions that you see where there are 4 empires and the 4th one is always Rome, but it's also consistent with John when he wrote Revelation. John in Revelation tells us in Revelation 17:9, when he's describing the beast, he says the 10 horns, or he says the seven heads of the woman are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other's not yet come. But he also says there are 7 mountains. Those 7 mountains are the location of Rome. So this is why you'll have many evangelists say there's going to be a revived Roman Empire, which I fully agree with from the scriptural text. But at any rate, it says, verse 27 is the week that has not yet come. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifices and the oblations to cease. That, my friends, is what we call the abomination of desolation. The abomination that makes desolate. That is not the destruction of the Jewish temple, that's the desecration of the Jewish temple. It's described early in Daniel chapter 8 when he's predicting Antiochus Epiphanes, who came in from 171 BC to 163 or 64 BC. And he actually desecrated the temple. He went in there and he erected a statue to the Greek god Zeus. And not only that, he put his own bust on it. And he called himself Epiphanes because he was the manifestation of God. That's what he called himself. And then he took a pig and sacrificed it on the altar, knowing that according to Jewish law, swine's flesh was abominable. So when he sacrificed that pig and shed swine's blood, it caused the sacrifices to cease. No priest can offer any burnt offerings, any type of any offerings in the temple anymore. It had been defiled. And because it was defiled, all of the Jewish Orthodox leaders and worshipers had to go underground. They could no longer worship in the temple, and so they had to go underground. To further his campaign, Antiochus Epiphanes was not just satisfied with that. He would send his delegations around to different Jewish towns, and he would force the priests to offer a pagan sacrifice so that he would break their will spiritually. And so he went to this one town called Modin, just a few miles outside of Jerusalem, and he picked on one Jewish priest too many because he came to this man that refused. And when he was going to offer the sacrifice, he said, no, Now, you didn't do that because now you're going to bring the whole Greek army on you. And then another guy, not wanting trouble, says, I'll offer it. And when he did that, the man killed him right on the spot. And then he killed the Greek ambassador that was sent. Now the war was on. And he looked around and he had 5 sons. And he says, you all come with me. And anybody else who fears God, come with me. And they ran to the hills. And this is what is called the Maccabean revolt. This is where you get the Maccabean wars from. In fact, in the Catholic version of the Bible, they have the apocryphal literature, and you have 1st and 2nd Maccabees that records this incident. So the Maccabees became the Hasmonean dynasty that later became the high priest in Jerusalem, and that's another story, but that followed down until the Romans took over around officially 63 BC under Pompey. But I said all of that to say this. Antiochus did it in the past. The Antichrist will do it in the future. Now, the reason we know this is because Jesus is going to testify to this very thing, and this is where I'm going to follow in. In that verse 27 of Daniel 9, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week, that is after the 7 years, in the middle of it, after the first 3.5 years, is when he's going to cause this abomination that makes desolate. He's going to march into the temple and desecrate it, and he's going to proclaim that he's God, and you've got to worship him as God or else you'll be killed. That's what he's going to do. He's going to do it on a grander scale than Antiochus did, but the same effect is going to do. Now, there's some that are preterists, and preterists believe that everything about Revelation is already past tense. It already happened with the destruction of the temple in AD 70. And so all of this is just kind of nebulous time until Christ comes back and judges. But that's not where Christ comes from. Christ always ties in the abomination of desolation to the Lord's return and consummation. The Lord comes back at the end of this time. It tells us that in Matthew 24:29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give his light, and the stars of heaven shall fall into the earth. And then shall they see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So he comes immediately at the end of this great abominable period. But anyway, to make a long story short, Daniel 9:27 is picked up by Jesus in Matthew 24:15. Jesus says, when you therefore shall see the abomination that makes desolate sitting in the holy place, and then he says, let the reader understand, and he refers him back to Daniel. He's going back here to Daniel 9:27. Then he says, when you see that, let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto the women who are with child, and the women that give children suck. In other words, you have nursing children in those days. He says, pray that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall come great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. That's the tribulation period. Now, you'll hear some people talk and say, well, no, it's just general tribulation. No, it's not. The Bible makes it clear there's a distinct tribulation, unlike any other time in human history, past or future. And it's not the first time you heard it. Jeremiah speaks of it. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7, he says, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Jeremiah sees this time in human history. He said it's the time of Jacob's trouble. In other words, it's going to be the worst persecution of the Jews that have ever existed. But God is going to save him in it. That's what you see in Revelation. And then you look at Daniel chapter 12. And Daniel says the time will come that'll be unlike there was ever a time since there was a nation. And he says that's when Michael the archangel, who stands for the children of thy people, shall stand up. Michael the archangel stands for Israel. He's the one that protects Israel. And he's going to stand up and he says there's going to be a time of trouble unlike there's ever been a time since there was a nation. And then he starts talking about the resurrection right after that. He talks about that period. Jesus is bringing up what the prophets have spoken of. He says, when you see the abomination that makes desolate stand in the holy place, run. Because it's going to be in Judea. That's the countryside around Jerusalem. So there will be a rebuilt temple because there is no temple now. So if you're reading the Bible as is, you will see that this must follow. And this is what's going to happen. And what's going to happen in the middle of the week. That's what Daniel 9:27 says. In the midst of the week shall he cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease. And for the overspreading of abomination shall he make it desolate. And he says, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So it's in the middle of the week. So how do we know when that week starts? Now we're going to get to talking about that. The week is going to start. The official sign is when the Antichrist makes that covenant. That's what Daniel 9:27 says. He shall make the covenant with many for 1 week. That is the official sign that we know that last 7-year tribulation period has begun. Before that, there's another sign that tells us we're going to enter it. We don't know when, but we know it's going to happen. The sign that leads up to all of this is the apostasy, the great sign of the saints turning away. That's what Paul says. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we're going to jump to. Because many people were teaching that the day of Christ, in other words, the day of God's wrath, was at hand. And so it was disturbing the Christians. And they were telling them this in the name of the apostles. And the apostles were not teaching that. You know how false prophets do. They always come and say, whoever you respect said it. Jesus said it. Paul said it. Peter said it. And none of them ever said it because they want you to believe it. And so they were teaching them and they were getting them all upset because the day of Christ was a day of wrath. And so Paul says, let no man be disturbed, either by word or by letter or by spirit or by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Then he says, for that day shall not come. Listen carefully. Verse 3, that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first. That falling away is what we call the apostasy. The apostasy means when people who know the Lord on a massive level turn away from true doctrine to false doctrine. They still have church. They still do ministry, but it's under a false gospel. It's under the doctrines of devils. And when they start turning away from God wholesale, that's when you know that's the fertile ground out of which the Antichrist will come. Now, this is clear. You see apostasy back in the days of Noah. That's why the world had to be destroyed. You had Adam. All those years he lived, 930 years, and you had Seth, 912 years. You had Enos, and all of these guys, and all of these, all the way up until Noah. Men that lived over 900 years, the vast majority of them. And they were all preaching the gospel, the pre-gospel. They were telling them about God. Well, if that was happening all of those hundreds of years, how did it come to pass that Noah was the last righteous person left? You had all of these people, including Noah himself, preaching. They're having children and grandchildren out the wazoo. The earth is populating incredibly, and they're keeping that message going, and yet it gets to the point where there's only one good man left. Which means that as much as this message was going out, it was being neglected. It was being undermined. All of these people were going against it in spite of the fact it was available. That was the great apostasy. And God's long-suffering in the days of Noah went all the way down until there was one man left, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. We know the names of the sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Or if you wanted to put it in the order of their birth, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. That was probably the likely order, with Japheth being the oldest, Shem being next, and Ham was the youngest one. Now, this is where the earth was repopulated. So you always have this apostasy, falling away. God starts again with a small group, build it up, apostasy, falling away. God starts with a small group, but he's not going to leave that cycle forever. So the Spirit is telling the apostles and the New Testament writers that in the last days, 1 Timothy 4:1, the Spirit speaks expressly that in the latter days some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. That's what Paul says. They all talk about it. Then later in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, he says, in the latter times perilous times shall come. Men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having the form of godliness, but having not the power thereof. He's talking about church folk. They're the ones who have the form of godliness, but there's no power in them. They're as evil as any evil person, but they think they're okay, in spite of the fact they have all of the traits of the evil world about them. Then in 2 Timothy chapter 4, this is Paul's last epistle. He talks about his death in this chapter. In this last epistle, he tells Timothy, be instant, in season, out of season, in verse 2. He says, reprove, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. Look at verse 3. For the time will come when men will not endure sound doctrine, but after they lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. Now, the Spirit is constantly saying this is the way it's going to go. In the latter days, Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3, knowing this first, that in the latter days scoffers shall come, saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. Jude talks about it. John talks about it. They all talk about it because the Holy Spirit was impressing them that as you got closer to the Lord's return, these signs would follow where people would turn away from God. And the apostasy would be the sign that would initiate the Antichrist coming on the scene, and then in the midst of that week, he would turn the tables, proclaim himself to be God. So therefore, I'm going to just follow in. You know the apostasy comes, and then you know that this is where the Antichrist will come and make the covenant. In the middle of that covenant, he will initiate himself being God alone. And that last 3.5 years of that 70th week will be called the Great Tribulation because it's far worse than the first. That's exactly when he has that fatal wound, according to Revelation chapter 13, verse 3. I saw one of his heads as they were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And the people, they worshiped the beast, and they worshiped the dragon, which gave power to the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, and who is able to make war with him? All the world will follow this because God is going to be orchestrating this deception. And the deception is going to be based upon people who would not give in to the gospel that they've had. I want you to watch 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 very clearly, because Paul goes down and lays this out. And it's not the first time he did it. In verse 4, he talks and describes the Antichrist. And you will hear scholars and people on TV saying there is no physical Antichrist, it's just a spirit. Wrong. There's a spirit of Antichrist and there is the physical Antichrist. Both are true. And he says, that time shall not come until there come a falling away first. And look at verse 4. And then shall that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Look at verse 4. Who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sits in the temple of God. See there? He's going to sit in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Look at verse 5. Paul says, don't you remember that when I was with you, I told you these things? In other words, I've talked about this before, and I'm reminding you again. So this is not the first time it happened. They made it part of the diet of their teaching. And he says, and now you know what will let until he be taken out of the way. For the mystery of iniquity does now presently work. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. Now, this is where you have to get out of the King James English and understand what let means. Let means restrain. In other words, God is putting a restrainer on the Antichrist, and he's holding him back until an appointed time when he's going to let him come out. So the Holy Spirit, as evil as the devil is, and as much as he's doing now, he's still under restraint. The Antichrist, which will be his physical human embodiment, is still not out, only because God is holding him back. But the day will come when he will be revealed in verse 8. That man of sin shall be revealed, whom the Lord shall destroy with the spirit of his mouth and with the brightness of his coming. Look at verse 9. Even him whose power is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish. Verse 10. Because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. For this cause, verse 11, shall he send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who love not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So therefore, God is telling you not only what he's going to do, but he's telling you why. This world of darkness is going because of people resenting the gospel. And because they will not give over to the love of the truth, God will give them over to a lie that they will love as the truth. And that's exactly God's method. He will give the whole world over to being a Satan worshiper, thinking that they've won, thinking that they're having peace, thinking that they finally found utopia, and they're going to march right into hell following after the man of sin. Listen, when God gives you his son and he gives you his glory and you turn from it, there's only a certain amount of chances you have before you become turned. There's only a certain amount of times you have before you are given over to wrong. This is what he means by reprobation. When people see something is wrong, but they keep going after it anyway, eventually God gives them over to it. Like homosexuality is given as one of those signs in Romans 1, because that's not natural. And even logically, you can figure out that that's not the way things are supposed to work. But when people are given over to something, they're totally given over to it, and they will justify why it's right, even though it's wrong. Just like evolution. Makes no sense. Nothing makes itself out of nothing. Why are scientists given over to it? Because there's so much given over to not serving God, he gives them over to a way that doesn't even make sense, but they will make it make sense because they're given over to a lie as the truth. Well, ultimately, people will be given over to this lie as well. And it's going to be strong delusion. not the little penny ante stuff you see. There's going to be false prophets and false Christs that are going to rise and deceive many. Matthew 24:11. In fact, he says in Matthew 24:24, they'll give such great signs and wonders that even if it were possible, they would deceive the very elect. Strong delusion. They're going to call down fire out of heaven in the sight of men. Revelation 13:14. They're going to give all of these signs and wonders. They're going to cause the world to make an image to the beast, and then he's going to have power to make the image actually come to life. People say that's a giant computer. Now let me speak a little bit to rationalism. The reason people try to make these things weapons and things that are man-made is because rationalism was a school of thought that came out of the Enlightenment. And basically rationalism says we don't need God, we don't need religion. We are able with our own minds to determine truth through our own reason. Now rationalism was totally anti-God in that sense, but it's also affected biblical interpretation through biblical criticism, where many people are interpreting the miracles in the Bible from a human standpoint because rationalism didn't believe in miracles. So therefore, anytime you have a miracle, you water it down to something you can see. Like Noah's flood becomes a local waterfall. You see, we bring it down because we know a miracle like that can't happen. So we take all of this stuff and we call it myth. This is why a lot of the Bible scholars would use that term myth and legend. This is where they were coming from in the late 18th and 19th century and 20th century. They were coming from a rationalistic mindset trying to find religious truth. And yet they denied the miraculous. So it already precluded them from ever finding the biblical God because he's miraculous. And even logic tells you everything we call natural is sustained supernaturally because we didn't do any of it. We don't cause ourselves to breathe. We don't cause ourselves to live forever. We don't cause ourselves to do anything. We call it natural. But it's not natural in the sense you can do it. It's supernaturally sustained. Otherwise, it couldn't be anything. So this type of thinking has infected the way people look. But when you look at what God is saying, he's being very clear. Now, I said that to say this. The book of Revelation oftentimes confuses people, which is why they don't look at it. And the reason they don't look at it is because the miracles in it are fantastic. They're amazing. And because of that, they don't see them as real. They see them as just some type of symbolic mumbo jumbo. And since it's symbolic, we'll never know. So let's just close the book and not look at it. But no, they're real. It's just that a lot of that hasn't happened before. You see, during the tribulation is when, near the end, God is going to shake the heavens and earth. He talked about that. He told us back in Haggai, the day will come, Haggai chapter 2, where he's going to shake heaven and earth in verse 6. He's going to shake heaven and earth out of its place. And then you'll see Hebrews saying that. Yet once more, God is going to shake the heaven and earth. He's never done it before. He shook the earth, but he's never shaken heaven and earth. Jesus describes it when God shakes the heavens and earth. He describes it in Luke chapter 21. He says the time will come where men's hearts will start failing them for fear and for looking after those things that are coming upon the earth. He says they'll see signs in heaven above and distress of nations and on the earth perplexity. And then they're going to start fearing because they've never seen the earth shake off its axis. They've never seen the stars coming and falling down like they are. They've never seen these type of things because God had never done that before. So he tells us it's going to happen one time, but because we don't believe God, we don't believe it's going to happen. And yet God is telling us, so we know it's going to happen. So the apostasy leads to the start of the Antichrist coming in. He moves his way up politically and militarily, according to Daniel. And then in the middle of that week is when he is now viewed not as a human, but as God. And in that position, he starts an open regime. And let me tell you this, the marking of the beast will transpire, 666. Many people are saying, boy, that's going to slip something under you. There's going to be some kind of secret code. It's not going to happen like that. You see, at the time of the end, the Antichrist will be out in the open. Everything is going to be about public worship. It's not going to be about him slipping something in on you. See, he has to work covertly now. When the Antichrist is ruling the world, he's overt. Everybody's going to be worshiping him whose name's not written in the book of life. The Christians are going to be less than the ones who are not. And so therefore, everybody's going to honor him as the beast. They're not going to have a problem with the marking because they really believe he's God because they're following the delusion. It's only the believers who turn from the delusion because God is also going to have the gospel at that time period. The gospel is going to be running neck and neck. Well, actually, it runs ahead of it. So that the warning not to take the mark is in Revelation chapter 14, which means the message is being given before the marking occurs. You know that if you take the mark of the beast, God is telling you, you will never enter heaven. You will be gone forever and burn in an eternal hell. If you read Revelation 14, 10 and 11, that's exactly what he tells you. So therefore, when you hear the gospel, you know that by taking it, you'll live eternally. But you also know you're going to die, because the Antichrist will be martyring saints unlike any other time in human history. Both Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 talk about it. He's going to have power over the saints, and he's going to have power over every kindred, tongue, people, and nation. And he's going to make war with the saints and overcome them. He's going to kill them, and yet those killed saints are going to show up in heaven. That's why you see in Revelation chapter 6, starting in verse 9, the saints are under the altar, and they're crying out to God, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, do you not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell in the earth?" You'll see them also in Revelation chapter 7. These are the ones that have white robes and palms in their hands. And one of the 24 elders say, "These are those that came out of great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. They shall hunger no more, neither shall they thirst. The sun shall not light on them, nor any heat. But they shall walk in the temple, and they shall serve the Lamb." And he's going to serve them, and they're going to have all pain and all tears wiped from their eyes. You see them also showing up in Revelation chapter 15. They're standing on the heavenly glass. It's like a sea of glass. And these are the ones who sing a song that no one can sing, because they came through the tribulation, but they gave their lives to God. And they were killed on the earth, but now they're standing. You see them in Revelation chapter 20. They're resurrected. They're killed on the earth, and then they're resurrected when Christ returns, and they live and reign with him 1,000 years. And they're the ones over the governments of the world. They're the ones over the administration. You won't have Gentile leadership. When the Lord establishes his kingdom, he and he alone will be ruling, and he will distribute that rulership to other saints. And if you've been faithful over a few things, he'll make you ruler over many things. Now, we haven't talked about the rapture. That's for another time. But in terms of what's going to fill in here, the apostasy leading up to that 70th week, and this is where you get the 7-year tribulation, because the 70th week of Daniel is 7 years. And the 70th week of Daniel is the 7-year tribulation. And in the middle of that is where the Antichrist makes his move, and he causes the abominations to cease. And that's why he starts his great persecution from Jerusalem. And he kills the Jews, but at that time, the Jews have also become Christian. This is what's so strange. You see, Christians now, they have turned over. And now he's after the woman. That's the 144,000 that have been redeemed, that are Jewish saints there. And they are internationally protected, while the other saints that are listening to their word are going to be killed. And yet during this time, God's word is going to be going out faster until the end, and it ends up at the very end. Now, we'll get to the other stuff at another time, but we'll stop there for now. God bless. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, in the mighty and holy name of Jesus, as you have so clearly given us your signs that lead up to the last days and what will occur, it tells us what we have to do now. We don't know whether that time is going to happen 4,000 years from now or 10 minutes. But we know, Lord, that we don't have 4,000 years, and we have today, and we need to be ready. And we need to proclaim that, because if others have the attitude during that time that we have now, then that won't be enough. So we want to be ready, Lord, at all times. As you said, because we don't know the day or the hour, we have to be ready at all times. And the ones who will not make it will be because they didn't have that attitude. So we pray, Lord, that you keep us prepared and diligent, always and in all things, and not to follow the Americanized way of falling prey to the dullness of what's around us, but to keep focus. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand.